Can you think of a single example in all of human history where there's ever been a nation or a culture that has been infinitely preserved? There's probably going to be some level of cultural inflow and outflow, right? They're probably going to bring some things with them. We're probably going to send some things back, depending on their travel habits or their family or whatever.
And that's
right?
why we should stop it.
Well, but then my question becomes what I said before is like, well, what are some examples of like some negative things that Hispanic people have brought to the United States culture?
I was watching the presidential debates, the Democrat primaries, and they all started speaking a language that I don't understand, and it made me uncomfortable. And you're next to two Hispanic people, and they're speaking English,
Dog,
and they
I
start speaking
literally
a
the
foreign
last place
language
I
right
went
in
to,
front of you.
the last place I went to was Aruba. They speak 4 languages there. Why do you think Americans are so they can't handle a couple people speaking Spanish? Right to the north of us in Canada, I'm pretty sure every single law has to be written in English and French.
So we were talking a little bit about the Great Replacement and immigration and stuff. Mio, are you back? Mio?
Of course, Mio leaves now.
Of course.
Oh, come on.
Welcome back. All right. So, I wanted you to kind of actually talk to Destiny a little bit, because Mio is the one who's been red pilling me a little bit. So, let's see if you can unred pill me, Destiny.
Oh, what a contest. Oh, man.
Come on, Ball, you can do it.
I want everybody else muted, though.
Why? Wait,
Nice
I'm
to
only
meet
here for
you.
like 10 minutes until I have to do my other
That's
thing.
fine.
But yeah,
That's
nice
fine.
to meet you too. What's up? Okay, what are
You
we
got
doing?
a big task ahead of you.
Right.
What's up?
They're talking about immigration, I believe.
Yeah, so I think immigration is bad, and we should stop it, or at least drastically reduce it. And the reason for that is largely because of what I chalk up to social cohesion and cultural issues, which are only getting worse. And when we look towards the future of a white minority, which everyone acknowledges, even Joe Biden, then I'd say it's not looking too good. The future's not looking too good for white people. And I think, I use this example, this hypothetical of a little kid in the future classroom who's, like 1 or 2 white kids maybe, and the rest of them are like all Hispanics and blacks, whatever. And they are all being taught together this critical race theory stuff about how white people have been evil all throughout history. They did colonization, they did slavery, they did Jim Crow, they did 3/5 whatever, Donald Trump, that white people did the Holocaust, white people did colonization. And essentially, I think it's, these other non-white kids in the classroom aren't going to be treating little Timmy too well. I'm curious what you think about that. I'm really, I'm hoping that you can unred pill me too. I'm hoping you can convince me why this is wrong, incorrect. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, so my guess is going to be that there's literally nothing I could say to unred pill you. In terms of like,
I'd agree, honestly.
I know we all know that. In terms of immigration is bad, I mean, obviously we're begging the question, when you say bad, what do you mean by bad? I'm guessing that the stuff that you talk about later related to social cohesion or something about our culture is, I guess, worth talking about. We talk about the idea that whites might be a minority in the future. I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. And then the future not looking good for white people. I mean, I don't know if like white people as a class are threatened. I think at the very least, if we're not concerned about like a global outlook on the future, we can at the very least be concerned about an American outlook on the future. But like obviously any one of these things, it kind of demands a little bit more detail. So I don't know where you want to start.
Yeah, so I agree. We should probably just start talking within the American locality, because we're not going to be able to make any my side, people who agree with me wouldn't be able to make any headway on this position globally before we do something locally here in America about it, if that's even possible. So I agree that's where we should start. I think when it comes down to like cultural and social issues, we see that these people they come from a different culture and they're not assimilating like the others in history did.
I'm just going to ask for some clarifications on this. So these are really loaded statements. So when you say these people are coming from another culture and not assimilating, there's 2 huge assumptions that we're making. One is that every person that comes, whatever that means, into the United States has a different culture. And then 2, that there's some cohesive culture in the United States that isn't being assimilated to. Can you please speak a little bit more to both of those factors?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think that, Yeah, I think that people in Texas and people in New York, they still have more in common with each other than they do with people in other countries across the world. I heard you say last night about what, Saudi Arabia or something. And I think that's ridiculous. I think that, mostly, like, you could definitely say that a huge proportion of people, especially in Saudi Arabia, who, like, what, 90% of them support Sharia law, they'd be out trying to behead like half the people in Alabama for breaking Sharia law, like women not wearing their headscarves outside and stuff like that. I think that as Americans, we have common core values, so we all have in common.
So there's 50 different ways we can go this. So when we talk, when what is your understanding? I'm not trying to quiz. I'm just trying to figure out where we're at here. So when you say Sharia law, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so Sharia law is like a very specific part of it refers to specific parts of the Quran where it talks about, it's not like the Bible. The Quran is written as the law book for the nation of Islam. They basically believe that Jesus was just a prophet who kind of gave some guidelines, and he said there will be like another one coming after me or whatever, which Christians would call the second coming of the Messiah, which Jews would say would be the first coming of the Messiah because Jesus wasn't that in their opinion. And Muslims would say that the second coming happened, and that was Muhammad. And Muhammad came and he laid out in one of the most descriptive languages known to mankind exactly how people are to act. And I've had conversations with Muslim friends about this. It's basically like directly a point system. You do this thing against the rules, you get this many bad points. You do this thing that is that's good, you get this many good points. And that's about getting into heaven. But with Sharia law, it's stuff like if a woman is adulterous, then she should be like stoned to death. Like then they do this. There's videos like of them doing this in these countries, and like 80 to 90% of them, there's Pew Research polls across all the Middle Eastern nations support this.
Yeah, so
40% of Muslims in Russia support it.
So backing off a little bit of this. So when we look at Sharia law, basically the idea behind Sharia law and the way that it's practiced across different countries is the idea that you kind of have this separate, we can call it like legal system that exists independent of the like whatever federal legal system you live in a country, where you have like different sets of like punishments and laws or whatever related to your religion. On its face, I personally think it's dumb, but that's because I'm not religious. But I mean, like Christians kind of roughly carry out these types of things in the United States. So as a
like beheadings for drawing the wrong cartoon.
So not everybody in every country is beheading everybody for doing things like that. They're definitely more.
No, they do that in
these Middle East. I got it. Hold on. I know that it's really fun to jump in with the most extreme examples to like own the argument. So let me just finish my point before you get really excited about that. Okay?
Go ahead.
So for instance, an extreme example in the U.S. might be like a Christian murdering an abortion doctor because they feel like they have some righteous calling from God to do it. Right. So in the United States, there are lots of churches where you can break religious laws, and there's like a religious process that you go through in order to purify yourself or get rid of these things. So in the Catholic Church, you might call this process of reconciliation and contrition, right? Now, this is it's not one-to-one comparable with Sharia law, but the concept is similar. You have like these separate kind of religious laws, you follow them, and you've got like a separate religious system related to punishment and reconciliation. So on its face, I don't think that just screaming Sharia law over and over again is necessarily like the boogeyman that it should be. There are obviously some forms of religious extremism that are bad, but I guess I get a little bit upset when conservatives want to pick and choose what religious extremism they want to follow. And I don't think that we see like these Muslim these Muslim minority populations in the United States like running around and beheading people that draw cartoons. Where it does happen, obviously it's a problem, but I don't think that it's like so much a concern in the United States that we need to be worried about it.
The big reason.
Hold on. We can go line by line if you want, but like you said like 20 things. I'm trying to get like some response here. I don't want you to say 20 things. I respond to one, and then you say 20 more things, right?
It's a good point.
Talk about how people in Texas and New York have more in common with each other than other countries across the world. I don't mean this as a getcha or as a sticking point, but I truly think that people do not have any idea the diversity of opinion that exists in the United States or even in a particular state. Nothing has shown this to me more than arguing with Europeans that try to tell me what US culture is like. And it's very strange because I'm starting to hear a lot of very right-leaning Americans give me European takes on US culture. When you talk about the culture of Texas, if you talk to somebody that lives in Texas, the way that people think in like Dallas, in Houston, in Austin is going to be completely different than anybody that lives in any other part of the state, like worlds apart.
Totally
so
agree.
I would ask around, if I were to go through like a dearth of social issues, and I were to have three different people, one, a guy with pink hair that's gay trans activist in San Francisco, and then two, like a relatively conservative person from rural Texas who happens to be Christian, and then 3, like a relatively conservative practicing Muslim from, say, Syria. And I were to ask them about things like gay marriage, the role of women in the household, the sanctity of marriage, the purity of women. Who do you think is going to roughly give me like more equal answers? Like the gay San Francisco guy and the other U.S. person, the rural person from Texas who's religious, or the rural person from Texas religious and the person from Syria? Like, what do you think is going to be like roughly similar?
Yeah, so I think that, well, there is obviously a common link between the Abrahamic religions in terms of like what the law has been since Moses, and so obviously they'll give similar answers on whether it's something that should be promoted or not. However, the idea of like reconciliation within the Catholic Church is that you don't go and do that so that you don't get like beheaded or like punished here in this world. You do that for like your eternal soul and your status in heaven. That's sort of my understanding of it. So it's very different from like if a woman is adulterous, she gets like beheaded at a soccer game or something. It's very different.
I think we all agree that
I drew the wrong cartoon, and so he needs to be beheaded, which is what it says in the book.
Sure.
So
that's bad. We agree with that. So part of the things that go along with Sharia law is, even though there are harsh punishments, and this is how a lot of modern Muslim scholars have tried to like massage Islam into the 21st century, is even though there are some very harsh punishments for things listed in the Quran, like things related to gay relationships or adultery, the standards for proof for those things are absurdly high. So in practice, in more moderate places, you don't see people being murdered for certain crimes. I think it's called the hudud.
Well, when you say modern places, it's funny because what you really mean is like westernized countries like Turkey or whatever, whereas in Iran, they've like, if they find out a guy is gay, they like chop his dick off, right? So it's very different. It's just which ones have been influenced by Western European civilization, the modern one. And as far as going back to, you make a great point about America having radically different ideas within it now, having crazy huge cultural differences all over the place. And I think that there's something to that. And maybe what I'm advocating for is the common culture of America like 60 years ago, something like that. And it's because America, since taking in a third of its population from foreign nations, has radically changed as a country. The values have completely been influenced.
Well,
the demographics, the electoral.
Just to not move off of this too much. So
Sure.
I'm not going to mince words or hide with you. When I say modern, generally that includes Western countries, but that's kind of my argument, that Muslim people that move to Western countries do, to a large extent, assimilate into the culture. That's why you don't see people murdering each other generally in Western countries, or beheading each other because they're adulterous or something, compared to places like sub-Saharan Northern Africa or places.
Well, they do that because of threat of prison here.
I don't think it's just because of the prison. I think it's because that they modernize quite a bit depending on their surroundings. I think most people do that. Their values will change in accordance to the people that are around them. I think that's a pretty basic thing that most of us.
I think it's a little bit ridiculous to assume that everyone is just going to assimilate away from their own religious texts and just abandon like the commands of their God just because it's what the other people around them are doing. I think it's a little bit ridiculous because these people, it's what their law book says, and so it's like the fundamentalists, as you would call them. You would call them fundamentalist religious extremists, and I would just call them people that are acting according to their own religious text as it stands.
Yeah, but I mean, like, even within the Islamic community, right? You've got like different hadiths that, you've got your Sunni and Shia divide. You've got different types of teachings that are carried out in different ways depending on your particular scholar. Like,
the Sunni-Shia divide.
If you have any experience dealing with people across different religions, you'll know that no two Catholic churches, no two Presbyterian churches, no two temples, no two mosques practice any particular law or teaching in exactly the same way. If that was the case, we wouldn't need those churches. People would just read the book and do exactly as it says in the book, right? These are way more community oriented.
Well, no, it's the especially Catholic churches. They have a hierarchy which directly descends from the Pope, and if anyone starts acting too far out of line, they have a process for that. They have a mechanism called excommunication, which means that, like, according to the church at large, that church is no longer officially teaching the word of God and has lost the right to do so, or that person, that practitioner. We have, what was the other point you made?
Sure, just in regards to excommunication, like, I think that's a really good point, right? So, like, the Catholic Church does have this process, like, But look how many Catholic churches allow gay people into them. How many people have even been excommunicated?
Big problem.
In the past 10
Yeah,
years,
maybe the
right?
Pope. Maybe there's an argument for the Pope to step it up on the gay stuff. I totally agree with you, Destiny Base.
I'm not
As far as the
making that argument. I'm just
divide,
saying it's funny that you're pointing to a process that exists after I tell you that there might be these processes that exist in Islam. They're just not carried out all the time because the standard is very high. And when you talk about excommunication, that's another good example of a thing that exists in the Catholic Church. It's an incredibly rare thing. Like,
So just like because it's hard to catch gay people being gay, that makes it okay that it's their religious law in order to execute gay people when you do catch them.
well, so it's not about trying to like score like internet debate points on like a forum. It's more looking at like how do people live in a certain culture, given religious influence, given political influence, given economic influence. It seems to be the case that if I go on to right-wing debate forums, I'll hear a million times, Islam is different than Christianity. The book and Muhammad saying that's direct law. It's different. In Christianity, those laws aren't direct. There's room for interpretation.
But that's what my Muslim friend taught me.
Yeah, that's great. If you want to bring a couple of
He's
Muslim
from Jordan.
If you want to bring a couple of Muslim scholars in here to have that conversation, I would love it. I can bring
Same.
several. If you want to do it,
that would be
fun.
that would be a good conversation.
Okay. But number two, the argument is already defeated because you and I both know that Muslim communities across the world, by your own admission, Western ones, live in very different ways than more fundamentalist or radical ones. And there are different Muslim communities that kill each other over different interpretations, different collections of hadiths when it comes to interpreting the Quran or the sayings of Muhammad. So the idea that there is this one cohesive block of Islam just doesn't seem to be the case. So if that is the case, then the next question is what makes people a little bit more moderate or dramatically more moderate? And maybe those are the things we should focus on rather than trying to be internet warriors decrying all of Islam.
Well, so the problem is the problem with Islam specifically is because that's what the law book says. Even if you can culturally influence or like gay up Muslims into not obeying their own religious laws, then just because that's the case, it doesn't make it not a problem that these people believe in this religion, which is inherently violent towards people that we want acceptance for in our society, even people that you and I both want acceptance for, not just gays. Okay, and so
let's say that we follow that then. So, what is your suggestion? Do you think in the United States that we should outlaw certain religions?
Well, it's an interesting conversation to have. It could be at the very least that there should be that there's an argument for a cultural push against the more of these people coming in and immigration from Muslim countries being restricted, which
we
is
do a cultural push. So, for instance, like Muslims in the United States are more likely to be accepting of gay people than evangelical Christians. So,
that's a huge argument.
I pose you the question once more: what ought we do? Do you think we should make some religions illegal? Don't say cultural push because we're already heavily culturally pushing people in ways that are probably too progressive.
So maybe we should restrict further immigration from Muslim countries, knowing that regardless of how westernized they are, the fundamentalists within their religion always have a better argument because they can point to the book and say, this is what it says and you're disobeying it. And that's why you see Muslim extremism just sort of pop up out of nowhere with random individuals who got back into their faith.
Okay, so step one is you would ban people immigrating from Muslim majority countries. That's your number one.
I don't know if I would ban it. I would have at the very least highly restrict it. I think. I think
what do you mean by highly restrict it? Like, what does that mean?
When President Trump said that he wanted a ban on all Muslim countries until we can figure out what the hell is going on, I think that struck a chord with a lot of people because we've all seen examples of Muslim extremist violence in our lifetimes. So.
Yeah, but the reason why that struck a chord with a lot of people for different reasons is because we've seen examples of like what is like the worst terror attack that you can think of that happened in the U.S.
The worst terror attack.
Probably 9/11,
Probably Waco or Ruby Ridge.
Okay, well, for the rest of us would probably say 9/11, right? So where did those hijackers come from, and why was that country absent from Trump's list?
Yeah, no, honestly, that's a really, really good point. I wish that there wasn't this sort of like Saudi Arabia, Israel, CIA alliance in order to. We probably shouldn't get into who did 9/11 because that would be interesting.
Yeah. Okay. So
hey, what?
For those of us that
are you going to deny all Mossad involvement in anything ever, like Jeffrey Epstein? Or
for those of us that don't want to ban like religions coming to this country, then like. It seems to be the case that there are a wide variety of religions that exist in the US. It seems to be the case that most people follow these religions like pretty decently well. We seem to have disagreements on social issues, but for the most part, it seems to be working out okay. Do you disagree with this? Like that Western Muslims in the United States seem to be doing decently okay?
Yeah, so no, I would agree with that actually. The problem is then, and this is sort of getting to the heart of the issue, that our culture here is being influenced by a lot of the other cultures that are coming here as well in turn. It's not just like they're just assimilating and fully accepting our values, especially because with Muslims, they're clearly not.
If that's the case, I'll agree with you because I probably wouldn't want that. What's like an example of Muslims negatively influencing U.S. culture?
Muslims negatively, well, I mean, the fact that they are changing it at all. I mean, they are.
Well, I'm asking how they're changing it. Because I'm very a-religious.
No,
I don't really like any religion. So if Muslims were influencing my culture, personally, I don't think I would like that much. So I'm curious, like, because when I look at like negative religious influence on our culture, most of what I see comes from Christian community. So I'm curious.
I don't think that Muslims are a huge percent of the population here, and so I think they have less influence over our culture than other groups. For example, like Hispanics, which which is really closer to the heart of the issue because that's where all of the immigration is coming from. That's if we talk about replacement, that's where it's happening. And you're seeing that their culture,
What was that?
Wait, that wasn't me, was it?
I don't know.
I don't think it was me.
I can't see who's typing or talking.
You mentioned the Mossad, and something like this always happens. Am I right, Destiny?
Yeah, so in terms of if we want to hop off the Muslim thing, so it sounds like right now Muslims aren't a big problem in the U.S. I don't know why we're complaining about this so much. You're right, they do.
Well, it's just an example of another ethnic outgroup that has a different culture than ours. If they were the majority that was taking us over, they would have more influence over our culture.
Sure, I understand. But when we're having an argument about how other cultures are ruining the U.S., when we jump to Muslims, and then we eventually can see that they're a pretty small, it's like 1% of the population is Muslim. So let's talk about Hispanic people. So what negative contributions do you think Hispanic people have made to U.S. culture?
It's interesting. I don't even know that I would initially categorize it like that it's a negative influence, rather than simply the fact that it's changing, and that's enough. Even if they had a superior culture in different ways, I believe in the right of all nations and of peoples in order to advocate for the protection of their culture and in order to try and preserve their culture from their ancestors. We could say that Europeans, because they made the culture in South America and Africa and the Americas better, that it was okay that we just wiped their culture out completely. But some people wish that didn't happen to their people.
Yeah. So can you think of a single example in all of human history where there's ever been a nation or a culture that has been infinitely preserved?
Not infinitely preserved. The people do adapt with the times. However, that's different from a foreign nation influencing their culture to make it more like their own.
Yeah, so foreign nations aren't what we're talking about. We're talking about people that immigrate to the United States. That's
foreign nationalists who come here and then get the legal documents and influence our culture.
So when you say foreign nationalists that come here and get documents, we're talking about immigrants, yeah?
Yeah, right.
Okay. So if people immigrate to the United States, there's probably going to be some level of cultural inflow and outflow, right? They're probably going to bring some things with them. We're probably going to send some things back, depending on their travel habits or their family or whatever.
And that's why we should stop it.
Well, but then my question becomes what I said before is what are some examples of some negative things that Hispanic people have brought to the United States culture?
I was watching the presidential debates, the Democrat primaries, and they all started speaking a language that I don't understand, and it made me uncomfortable.
So
that negatively influenced me because it's another language that we all Americans don't share, a foreign language from other places that's being spoken, that our politicians are pandering to people who speak a foreign language in order to win elections. I think that's a problem.
So when I'm looking for big ways that are influencing my culture, I have a limited amount of brain space, a limited amount of attention, a limited amount of time. So when I ask you, how do you think immigrants are negatively influencing our culture? And your go-to is going to be 30 seconds of, Rubio and Cruz or whatever, or some people on the Democratic primaries, talking Spanish for a minute. Is that really the best you have? Can you give me something a little bit more substantial?
The fact that it's made it all the way to the elections for the highest office in this country, and it's like it was a large amount of candidates. There was at least 5 of them, and they're speaking a foreign language, and that's not. It's so pervasive in our country. These people who their other foreign language is important to them as a part of their culture now make up such a vast portion of the population that they need to be pandered to in their own language, not ours, not the American language, in order to win elections. I think that represents a huge problem that trickles way down throughout all of society, and that's just like the peak. That is the epitome of it. It's the highest office in the country, and that you can take that down to anywhere.
Yeah. So, I agree that people in the United States should all speak English. I think that it's a good thing to do that. I don't see that like a couple candidates trying to speak another language to pander to groups of people is like the worst thing in the world. Like people pander all the time. Canada to the north of us literally has 2 official languages. There are a lot of countries with multiple official languages. Not to say that Spanish should become an official language of the US. What?
That's because there's English Canada and French Canada. It's not the same as like we're bringing in foreign nationals and then pandering to them in their language with their culture, talking about what they want.
I don't understand when you say foreign nationals. I don't know why you're loading the word so much. You're talking about immigrants to the United States.
Yeah, but what were they before they came here to the United States? Foreign nationals, right? That's what they grew up as. What?
So
right?
We can argue this. We can argue this if you want, but when you say foreign nationals, you're trying to make it sound like I guess it's part of your narrative that it's a literal invasion or whatever. But we're talking about immigrants to the United States of America. Like no, that's not. But that's what your language implies, right? The foreign national, right? We're talking.
Well, no, I mean, I don't know if you can tell me that it's a false way to categorize these people because it's immigrants is another correct way to categorize these people. But I think it makes my point in that these people, they grew up in a foreign nation. They have a foreign culture. Everything about it, their nursery rhymes, their bedtime stories. It's all these people, all the people in America used to have all these things in common, and now all the people in America don't have all these things in common. People in society are more likely to get along if they have them in common.
I think a lot, like even my understanding of history is shit, but I know that you're just wrong, right? Like the idea that the U.S. used to have all this, like literally the beginning start of our 13 colonies was people running around trying to convince everybody, please God, we have to work together as one government, despite the fact that all of us are so different, right? And the idea that we have some cohesive U.S. culture that's not influenced by foreign tales, if you think some of the most conservative things ever come from like brown and black people, right? Like if you think of cowboys and Indians, right? Cowboys, literally, that's a Mexican thing, right? Or if you think of like country music, good country music, this a lot of this comes from blues, which is like black people music. Like I don't know this. I think that there's this big like understanding or misunderstanding that there was this like ancient white U.S. culture that was like walled off from everything else. But the reality is that like there's a ton of stuff culturally in the U.S. that has like come from other countries, and that's just how the U.S. has always worked.
Yeah, it's not how the U.S. has always worked. The U.S. was 90% white until like 1965, for like 300 years, way before the formation of it, like for years and years before that. The different states.
Do you see how you're not engaging? So do you see how instead of engaging with my point, you wanted to talk about the Hart-Celler Immigration Act immediately because that's what you've got like talking points memorized for?
Well, no, it's exactly engaging.
I'm just telling you, like, I'm just pointing out
America. You're saying that America was always this multiracial, multi-ethnic community.
Anything about race? I never said anything about race. I just pointed to the fact that there's a lot of historically like white things that we see in the United States, and I'm telling you, a lot of these things didn't even come from white places. And you immediately jump to try to talk about Hart-Celler. We can talk about Hart-Celler and that Immigration Act if you want, but I just think it's funny that you like run down dialogue trees instead of engage. Sure, just engage with my conversation. That's all I'm asking you to do, okay?
Yeah, so what I'm saying is the reason why I brought that up is it's not a pivot. It's because the demographics of America, you can see the culture like all downstream from that. And that's not me saying this.
We've never had one cohesive, unified culture.
Sure, but we have all had things in common that we don't have as much in common with people from other nations.
You realize we literally fought a civil war, right? Like this happened.
Well, I mean, yeah, but that was like over political stuff, like states' rights, taxes.
You can call it whatever you want to call it, but in one breath, for you to argue that we've had this cohesive U.S. culture, 90% white shared values, and then say, well, we actually almost completely fucking killed ourselves because we had a division on political issues. Like this country has always had divisive of issues this country.
Yeah, and you know what? Europe and or like France and Germany considered themselves mortal enemies as recent as the 1940s. However, they still have more in common with each other than they do with like sub-Saharan Africans or Chinese or Arabs. Right.
Well, it depends on what you mean. First of all, we're generalizing so many different types of people there. Okay. And then like, secondly, it depends on what groups of people you're talking about and what types of commonalities that you're looking at, because there are things in the United States, and I've said this for a long time, and Republicans are just starting to realize it, although I guess it's probably to the chagrin of you and other people, that like, if they do more appeals to people that aren't white, there's actually a lot of commonality there. That if you're in favor of like traditional family values, of traditional like marriage roles and traditional gender roles, you actually have a lot in common with like more like Islamic communities or Black communities or, you know, Catholic, Christian, Hispanic communities than you do with a lot of the white people in the United States. Like, you've got technically a huge voter base there that shares more in common with you than other white people do in the United States.
Yeah, see, I reject that. I think that we don't have more in common with these people. And the number one thing is, I mean, that I'll point to for this is critical race theory. That is like it become everybody's number one issue. They're pushing it in education. They're pushing it and then you know what it is? Every single non-white ethnic group has an inherent motivation in order to support this. Every single non-white group, like, they disagree with us on some of the most fundamental things. Whites are the only people, the only demographic that all vote that poll majority to support free speech. Whites are the only group.
I just want to say that, and it's entertaining as a conversation, I guess, but like when I lay out a point and you're so eager to like jump down like another dialogue, you're like critical race theory, like nothing we're talking about has anything to do with critical race.
Of course it does, because you're talking black.
It doesn't.
It absolutely does. The reason
Muslims invent critical race theory now?
No, they didn't. But again, as I said before, they all have an incentive to support those types of programs, to support that in education, to support the idea that their people were oppressed. They need affirmative action, and they should get a leg up over some white kid who's equally qualified because of oppression or something.
Okay. I think that we can have conversations about all of these topics, but when you've got this all roped together in this hyper-conspiratorial
it's called a cohesive worldview. It's all puzzle pieces, man.
Well,
it turns out like none of these problems exist in a vacuum, and it's all like it all ties in together. Like the movement of people's cultures, the demographics, the electorate in the United States, the ideas that come from our politicians, the things that they end up pandering to, which then become policy. It's all related, man.
I agree, but you're the one that's arguing that you want to create some type of cultural vacuum, that you want to insulate our borders, and I guess maybe ban foreign TV shows or movies, or not allow immigrants from certain. Like, you're the one that's arguing that you can like put the U.S. in this form of like cultural, temporal, and spatial vacuum, that we can cut ourselves off from our culture. That's just not going to be the case. Your culture.
Well, that's what every country has done all throughout history, and that's why they all had thriving cultures.
That's why I asked you for a single example of some country that literally had an unchanging, static culture for the duration of its existence, and they just don't exist. That's just not how culture works. It's not an
unchanging culture. However, if you look at like French culture from 200 years ago, you look at French culture from 100 years ago, and you look at French culture now, there are common themes. There are things that they kept that are distinct from German people, that are distinct from Africans, Chinese, Arabs, Somalians, whatever.
Yeah, but like, look at, as soon as you start opening up trade, as soon as you start like input, as soon as you have like the Silk Road opening up, as soon as you've got people buying tea from other people, as soon as you start shipping goods and services from one area to another, you get a lot of people traveling. Cultures are just going to slowly change over the world. Like,
China's doing that, and they're still maintaining their nationalistic culture somehow.
Yeah. Well, do you want us to be more like China? Do you want us to start genociding groups of people in the United States? If you want to take that position, you can, but
I don't know if I would categorize what's happening there as genocide, but
well, maybe I don't know. With a lot of the commies, at least, then I guess that horseshoe becomes a little bit more real every day. Well, I'm not sure if I'm arguing against the far right or the far left. But anyway, the problem is that here is my issue as somebody that isn't scared of people that have skin that's a little bit darker than himself, right? My issue is, I need like a better argument for why I should care about something other than like sometimes a politician panders using Spanish or CRT. Like, if I could see that there were certain like groups of immigrants that were doing real damage to my country, that were actually like causing like these really horrible effects to happen, then like this would be something that, of course, I think. Okay,
what if I told you Hispanics, not illegal immigrants, Hispanics commit crime at like twice the rates of whites here in America? Yeah. Is that not an argument to not bring in more until we figure out why that is and stop it?
I think that if that were true, it would be something to look for. But I'm pretty sure that the crime rates of like most immigrant populations tend to be a little bit lower than the native population.
Well, again, I'm not talking about Hispanic immigrants because the fact is they actually get more violent, like second generation, after they've lived here.
Yes,
and,
after they've assimilated to the culture, they start to come closer.
Yeah, but
you
say that, but it's whites aren't committing the crime, and this is our culture. So like, it's obviously our culture is not the problem. It's Hispanics living here in America among all the other ethnic groups. It's things like La Raza, where they're trying to take back land from Mexico. Well, La Raza means the race. They're trying to take it back for their racial group.
So La Raza means the race. It's literally the names of like thousands of different organizations. There is not like one cohesive group called La Raza, okay? Trump tried to do this with some lawyer or whatever. People have looked into this a million times. It doesn't work. If you want to read more about that, you can. When you talk about the fact that Hispanics are more likely to commit crimes than white people, if you look at just like the entire race, that's true. But when you start to control for age, Hispanics tend to commit less crime, especially the immigrants. Now, the second and third generations tend to commit more crime than the first ones, but that's because their crime rates are coming in line with Native Americans or Native American citizens, not Native Americans. It's not that they're like far exceeding other white people. Hispanic immigrants tend to be way younger. When you've got a fuck ton of white people in this country that are 70 years old, yeah, of course, they're not out committing crimes. You don't see, Grandpa Jerry outside robbing a gas station. You don't see Grandma Susie outside, stabbing some dude for crack cocaine or whatever. It tends to be younger people that commit crimes. Your optimal crime committing years are it's like 14 to 22 years old or whatever. And when you've got way more younger people in a group, then yeah, there's probably going to be like a little bit more crime from that particular young demographic.
So either way, regardless, is that not a good reason to stop bringing in people of those demographics, even if it's just in that age group here into America, knowing that they will be committing disproportionate crimes and we don't know how to solve it?
We do. I mean, we don't know how to solve crime.
We haven't solved it.
No country has solved crime. If you figure out how to do that, let me know.
Right, but we can stop bringing in the demographics that are more likely to commit this crime disproportionately, right?
Well, the question would be, if we really
what's wrong with that?
Well, if we really wanted to stop bringing in criminals, we would just stop importing men. We would just say only women are allowed to immigrate if we want to do that, right? So that argument doesn't.
Yeah, it turns out society needs men, though. That's the thing.
The question. Good point. So the question is do the benefits outweigh the negatives? You're never going to have an immigrant population where you bring in a whole bunch of immigrants and none of them are criminals. There's always going to be some percentage of people that engage in criminal activity. That's just a fact of life, right?
Right, so but then them and their descendants end up committing more crimes. And so it's like, should we not have a conversation about stopping bringing in a group, even if it's just specific demographics, which are more likely to commit crimes, without throwing off the gender ratio in America like they did in China by not bringing in men and only women or something?
Hispanic children aren't committing crimes at higher rates than native white children. That's just not the case.
I mean, it's again, you're the one who said that it's because of these specific age groups that they're in, that they're committing crimes at higher rates than even the whites of those age groups.
Younger people commit crimes more than older people. A lot of our baby boomers are white. So when you get a ton of old white people
crimes at higher rates than even the whites of their own demographics.
No, that part is not true, right? The Cato Institute does a ton of research on immigrants and then immigrant-related crime. And when you control for age and all of these things,
again, not immigrants, Hispanics I'm talking about here. And so it's like whether they are immigrants or they're second, third generation, whatever, there's an argument to stop bringing in more people of this demographic. Is to stop them committing more crimes. And I don't know why you would push back on this. It seems like I thought you were saying if there's a reason that it could benefit society, let's do that or whatever. If you're saying, let's just not have any immigrant men, you know what, Destiny, we might be able to agree if you want to if you want to restrict immigration from Latin countries to only hot Latino women, I think we could actually find some agreement on that. This could be our moment.
I mean, I don't want to go full debate, bro. But I mean, obviously, I've had to do this research for my Fuentes conversation. If you control for age, Hispanic immigrants or the children of them do not commit more crime than native white people. That's just not the case.
You think so? It's I'll look into that. I'm not sure. But the last time I looked into these stats, it was a long time ago. I'm not sure if I did the adjusted for age thing, but at the very least. Again, my argument against social cohesion stands. I'll grant you that just because I'm not sure. I'm not 100% on that fact. So I'll drop that line of argument because I don't want to be dishonest or saying shit I don't know. But you know, and I trust that you do your research.
I can go dig through more shit later. This is the kid. This has to do with immigrants. Now, this isn't children of immigrants, so this is like legal and illegal immigrants compared to natives. But I know that Cato breaks out like a lot more too. I don't have those things on hand. But
sure, and again, I think that it may be that what you saw is that immigrants don't commit higher rates of crime when you control for age. However, Hispanics still do. Over Americans or over whites, and it's the same with African Americans as well. It's like different groups do commit crimes at different disproportionate rates and at different amounts. And it's just like, you know, we can, if we ignore these issues, if we stick our head in the sand about it and say that's not happening because it's racist to acknowledge it, then we're never going to solve these problems. It's like.
So I don't think anybody said if crime happens here, we should obviously deal with it. I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't think. Well,
and if it's falling upon ethnic lines, don't you want to care about those ethnic communities in order to reduce the crime rates within them?
So are you going off of evidence that suggests that Hispanics in general commit more crimes, and that's what you're using in service of your point?
Yes.
Okay. How do you know that you can extrapolate that onto Hispanic immigrants?
Well, no, I wasn't.
Hispanic immigrants. He's saying native Hispanics commit more crime than native people.
But if this is supposed to be in service of an argument against immigration, how do you?
Well, because the idea is that immigrants come here, then they have children, and those children are going to commit more crimes.
Oh, but
I'm glad somebody's following.
Yeah, sure. But the problem is that when we're talking about immigrants in general, the crime rates of second generation or even third generation or fourth generation immigrants might not actually match on to the crime rates of I guess more immigrants who have been here for like a longer time. Or it seems like just something feels weird to me about the idea that we would say that like immigrants in the U.S. have higher crime rates than white people.
Well, so here, real quick, so to be clear,
raise crime.
These are all hypothetical arguments. Or I'm using hypothetical numbers, but like his argument would be that like a native white person commits violent crimes 5 white people per 1,000 white people, and then it sounds like my counter argument is, well, immigrants commit violent crimes at 3 Hispanic people per 1,000 Hispanic people, but he's saying, well, the children of those immigrants will start to commit violent crimes at 7 Hispanic people for 1,000 Hispanic people. So even if the immigrants themselves commit less crime, as the second and third generation immigrants are born, their crime rates will rise up past a level of native white people. Therefore, it's an argument against having Hispanic immigrants come to the country at all, knowing that their children are going to be committing violent crimes at higher rates than native whites.
Way to go, man. Love this guy.
Okay.
Yeah, but the problem is like the Cato Institute is like broken out like all the numbers on the age groups of the crimes that violent crimes people commit, controlling for real crimes, not like illegal immigration or whatever. And it seems to be the case that for whatever reason, and I don't think it's because Hispanic people are better or worse or whatever, it's probably just conditions by which they immigrate here. It doesn't seem to be the case that Hispanic people commit more crimes than native white people. But I mean, even if they did, there are other arguments to have there. But like, I mean, we all agree that like crime is bad and people shouldn't be committing crime, and that would be good. But like we have to look at like the pros and cons for immigration. And then we have to figure out like, well, you know, there's going to be some level of crime. Obviously, is it worth it for, you know, the goods that we get from immigration? But I'm guessing.
Sure. Yeah. That would be a decent conversation if you want to put an economic value on like living in a country that doesn't have higher crime rates. But more importantly, I mean, again, I think the biggest argument against immigration is the idea of like when we have a white minority in America, and especially when that plays out in the inner cities, we're going to see these other demographics which are more violent, that are being taught racial revenge theory against white people, essentially, that they're not going to treat the little white kids in the class decently. And then, you know, when that plays out in the rest of society, so like when you're being considered for a job and then all of a sudden it's people of color that's ahead of you, and it's like, are they going to hire an oppressor colonist, you know, white guy, or are they going to hire someone from their own ethnic in-group? And
don't you think that like and maybe I'm being a little bit too optimistic here, but don't you think
the same ideas
and the power of the U.S. and its continuing example for the past 250 or whatever years maybe shows that just because white people are no longer like a super majority of the population doesn't mean that they'll instantly be destroyed by like all the minorities. Like I like the problem with how I can engage with this argument is that what you've given me is a pretty fantastic story, and I have no real way to fight against it, right? Like, because I can tell you, I could spin another million stories that like I mean, it's just a story. Like you're telling me that in the future, like white kids are going to be bullied for being
yeah,
white.
this is like where all the trends are heading. That's the thing. And so it's like, if this is, so I just want to be clear. I just want to be clear about what I just heard. Are you essentially saying that if my hypothetical story time made up example is something that would turn out to be true, and I could demonstrate that to you and convince you of that you wouldn't have an argument against what I'm saying about stopping immigration, stopping all of this, preventing this situation from happening somehow? You would be okay with what I'm saying?
Well, if you show me that problems exist, I'm going to look at like the best ways to fix those problems, right? So if I've got a friend group that's 10 guys and 10 girls, and there's fighting between like 3 of the girls and none of the guys, my solution isn't going to be get rid of all of the fucking women, right? Like that's not
well, that's because we need women in our society, right? But we don't need immigrants.
It's not about, well, I mean, that's like arguable, right? So then the question is like, do immigrants
just fine
provide,
without them?
Well, I mean, maybe. I mean, I guess it depends on whether or not you believe that any of the economic gains made by immigrants being here are real or completely imagined, or.
I mean, yeah. So I mean, again, it's like sort of an economic game versus like the culture and the society and the perpetuation of the historic American people, the ones who built spaceships before all the immigrants got here, right? We have the spaceship builders, and then we have the non-spaceship builders. And the more of the non-spaceship builders that you bring into your civilization, the less likely that you are to build more spaceships. Does that make
here's
sense?
a question. Do you think anybody in this call right now has ever been involved in building a spaceship or doing anything like that? And then my next question is going to be, do you think that anybody in this call offers any value to society independent of being a spaceship builder?
Yeah, Radical Coder, he said that he worked at Lockheed Martin before on stream once. So he's, definitely, we're looking at a spaceship builder right here, highly intelligent individual.
Hey, so to be clear, I worked on web apps at Lockheed Martin, not rocket ships. So yeah, thank you.
I was trying to hype you up, King. All right, I can't use.
Well, that's
Radical
really
Coder
awkward because
as
I can think of a girl that I could hype up that worked at Lockheed as a systems, I don't know how much I can say, working on satellites, and she's a second generation Mexican immigrant. So
we got the affirmative action diversity hire department in play, huh?
I mean, that was her job. She got those clearances. Like, if you think that our like private military contractors are doing diversity hires, I mean, like that's all on you.
Some of this stuff I just say because I love the look on Sanzel's face when I'm saying it. I won't lie.
Sure. But yeah, so I mean, like people could come from other countries and contribute to projects here. If anything, I think I'd be a little bit worried about like immigration examples that you're giving, like banning Muslims from coming here, is losing some of that potential talent.
But yeah, well, I mean, again, it's the more social cohesion that you have in a society, with social cohesion being like, everyone having the same culture, which leads them to get along better when they pass each other in the street, stuff like that. People from different cultures don't have as much in common, and so they are less likely to mesh in that way and to be able to do that. It doesn't mean that they can't. It doesn't mean it's impossible. It doesn't mean that I've never had a Muslim friend, but it does mean we're less likely to be able to do that. And so I want our country to be more likely to be able to do that.
Where do you think the biggest like cultural divides exist today in the United States or in any Western country? I'm curious.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Where do you see the biggest cultural divides existing across most Western countries right now? Like if you had to kind of guess.
Like across countries?
Or like within countries across several
Oh,
countries.
yeah, there's California and then America. Let's go with that.
Okay, so...
And you know something funny? There's an LA Times article saying that what changed the electoralism in California is changing demographics, and that is the reason why the right wing is like doomed electorally basically forever now. They call it an ice age.
But the right wing isn't doomed. First of all, we've had huge groups of immigrants coming to this country since the inception of this country. Number one. Number two, like the Republican Party absolutely can appeal to different demographics of people. Trump did it with Hispanic voters. He repeated that 1 million times over, and he absolutely did. Trump got amazing turnout in Hispanic voters because
amazing. Like,
when
it's
Republicans
still less 50% like normal.
When Republicans realize that if they just be a little bit less racist, they actually share a lot in common with some of the more conservative people that come over from south of the border, I think they'll do a lot better in elections. When I ask you for like a common point of difference between like where are the big cultural divides, it's not between California and the U.S. I think it's funny that you say that, but it's between generally rural people and city people. Like I think people that exist in cities tend to feel a little bit more culturally cohesive than people comparing themselves to like cities and rural people.
Well, that's because of the demographics, right?
It's not necessarily because of the demographics.
No, tell me about the rural demographics and how diverse they are, man.
I'm just telling you that it's funny you bring up California when people that live in like San Francisco and LA are probably going to have a lot more common than people who live in like Bakersfield or places in Central California.
I don't know what Bakersfield is.
Rural California is going to be way different than the people that live in like the big cities, the big tech or entertainment cities like LA or in the Bay or whatever. Right.
Okay.
So I'm just saying that like these divides that exist aren't even necessarily on racial lines. Like there's going to be white people that live in New York City that feel like they have more in common with a Pakistani immigrant than they would with, you know, somebody that maybe lives in upstate New York or somebody that lives like in a rural, like Midwestern town or something. Right.
The problem is with what you're saying is that basically like everyone disagrees with that. There's like there's tons of news articles out now about how the demographics is like led to the destiny of California, the changing demographics in the major cities, in the places where the votes matter most or whatever, however it works. It's the changing demographics is what led to California going from a place that Reagan won, that Nixon won, to being a blue state, like basically permanently. They're calling it an ice age. Like Republican strategists are calling it an ice age in California.
Sure, Republican strategists say
it's not because there's the farmers are outnumbered by city people. It's because the white people suddenly became outnumbered by beautiful ethnic minority people of color. You know,
so just to be clear, I'm sorry, but like I want to win elections is not a good reason to change your immigration policy. That's not a good.
Why not? Why not? That's the good reason why.
Because it doesn't serve the interests of the rest of the American people. That your political ideology is so garbage, it only appeals to a certain type of person.
It appeals to the historic American people, which is who I'm trying to protect and who I want policies from the elections in order to benefit.
American people mean that's a meaningless statement because you're probably including like Italians and Irishmen and shit in that, and it probably wouldn't even be accurate to say that. So
again, Italians and Irishmen
demographic people that doesn't even exist.
Yeah, Italians and Irishmen, it turns out, still have more in common with each other than they have with people from like Latin America.
Do you really think that like an Irishman and an Italian that live in fucking New York City that go to like Manhattan to work every day that they have less in common with each other or whatever, and then they'd have like more in common with like an immigrant, or what do you mean by that?
Yeah, because again, as you've said before, we had these waves of immigration, much smaller than we have now, by the way. These waves of immigration from these places, and they all assimilated in a shorter period of time than the 60 years since we've started bringing in a massive change in demographic from Latin America. So it's like they've had time to assimilate in the same period of time, and they're not. So we're still seeing, you know, like.
When
ethnic
you say, like,
issues
assimilation, I guess, like, what do you mean? Or what does that mean to you?
What does assimilation mean? Is that
because I'm trying to, like, earlier, one of the first points you said, I wrote this down. You said our culture here is being influenced, and then you said it was a negative influence, that our culture is changing. So I'm just curious, like, where is all of this negative Hispanic influence like showing up at in ways that's changing our culture?
Yeah, so again, like I said before, the fact that our culture is changing itself is a negative. It's like what
change is negative?
Like, for example, even if I was an African living in Africa, and we have our culture, we have our tribal dances, we're living in our
African culture, but go ahead.
Well, okay, so what, like Bantu. I'm a Bantu.
Africa is a huge continent, so I don't know what you mean with African culture, but go ahead.
So let's say I'm a Hutu in Rwanda, okay, and I'm doing my tribal dances. I'm doing my African art, living in my mud huts without wheels or whatever, and the Europeans show up with their culture, and they want to change our culture to be more like theirs. I would still be advocating for my people to keep and preserve our culture, because that's my people's culture. And I don't want some other foreigners to come in and say, well, I think that they think that their culture is better than yours, so they're going to influence it. They're going to change.
Don't you think
But
that's a
here's
little
the
bit?
thing,
Don't you think
most people
Rwanda
that-
is a little bit weird as an example there, when there's literally been like a fucking ongoing genocide in that place, like with like hundreds of thousands of people killed? Like that seems to be like one of the worst examples that you could go to for like, well,
no, that's actually a great example, because the reason for that genocide is because the Hutus and the Tutsis are two different ethnic groups who have been living together in Rwanda, and the Tutsis became a minority, and then electoral power was taken from them, and the Hutus all did like a mass genocide of the Tutsis who were in power, calling them oppressors. Does that not sound familiar? Or do we need to talk about South Africa?
I don't see that happening in the United States right now. I'm just saying
Right.
that it feels like even within
That's
Rwanda,
exactly what I was saying would happen to little Timmy.
Okay, that has yet to be demonstrated. The Sandal guy wants to talk. Sorry, I keep cutting him off.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Mio, when we talk about immigrants coming from like, say, Central America or Mexico or places like that, right? Most of these people are pretty socially conservative. Don't you think that maybe if the Republican Party wanted to get some of their votes, they would just be a little bit less racially charged in their policies? Maybe not try and put up a giant fucking fuck you wall that has no real significance other
Honestly,
than to say fuck you, brown people.
I really got to say, like, if you watch the Republican Party GOP events, there's not a lot of racism going around there. I think if Republicans wanted to win over the Hispanic vote, what they should really do is just appeal to them economically and offer to give them free shit like the left does, because it seems like that's what the immigrants really want more than anything and care about, is getting free shit that the American people who were already here would pay for.
You mean kind of like how under Trump we all paid for free shit for all the like wealthiest Americans and the corporations that got the big tax cuts? Or
hey, I'm not down with any of that either, man. I'm totally crack down, tax them. You know, we should have healthcare.
It seems weird that like you'd cry about free shit when like all these European countries that you hearken to, that you seem to love so much, give their citizens so much free shit. But
well, I mean, again, it's like I just think that would be a better way to appeal to these people, because they seem to vote based on that, whereas the historic American people, especially white people, are voting like basically 50-50 on every issue based on like political ideology, rather than just they just came here for an economic opportunity, and as much as they can possibly increase that, whatever happens to this country, that they just treat as an economic zone for whichever third worlders want to move into and get their opportunity. I think it's not the same at all.
Isn't that what the Italians and Irish did?
Literally came here for economic opportunities, made their own ghettos in parts of New York and the East Coast,
and assimilated into the historic American culture,
which is exactly what Hispanics have done. Like,
that's not what they've done. They're speaking Spanish in the presidential debates. They're speaking Spanish. They weren't speaking Irish or Italian or German in the presidential debates.
Okay, don't get so triggered. Okay, slow down. All right.
I'm just saying, man, they weren't speaking those languages. Obviously, it speaks to a difference in the assimilation of these people and those people, obviously. Because these people are holding on to their language, which is one of the most integral parts of culture that there is. It's like, and you can tie that to any of the other facets of culture, and it's the same.
Like there are like a lot of second generation Hispanic immigrants that don't even fucking speak Spanish anymore. So, but
there are, but
like different like.
I have a lot less of a problem with those than the rest of them. But it turns out that's not how it's all playing out. That's not how. Like again, it's still too many. We have enough. They are now making up enough of the electorate, the people who still speak Spanish and maintain that as their culture, that they're being pandered to in elections because they make up such a huge proportion of the electorate. It would be the same, like you asked about what negative influence have Muslims had on our country. If they were 30% of the population, you best believe that you'd be seeing that too.
What percentage of like second generation Hispanics need to speak English like really well for you to think that it's like an acceptable number of people?
That's a good question. I'll think about that one and get back to you on it.
Okay, just because I'm looking at this because I'm curious. Apparently, like 92% of second generation Hispanics speak English well or very well.
Right, and they still speak Spanish, a lot of them too. And it's like
85% speak at least some Spanish at home.
It's right, so that we've got like But you said 85% of them speak Spanish at home?
Some Spanish at home, at least some Spanish at home. So it seems
Right.
like the
And
kids
so
are
it's
learning
like they
English
treat
more
that
than
as
the
their
parents.
primary language. Their primary language is a foreign language, foreign, not us.
No, I think that's just the language they speak to their parents in.
Right.
So
and
my
it's-
grandma came from Cuba. She doesn't really know. She never knew English that well. My mom speaks Spanish in the household, but my mom didn't even teach us how to speak Spanish. I don't.
So
even
I've
know
been
that
talking to I've been talking to a violent second generation immigrant this whole time without knowing it.
Yep, this whole.
Oh,
time.
no wonder. It all makes sense now.
But like, so I don't even know how to speak Spanish, even though my mom, quote unquote, spoke it in the household.
Okay, well,
Right.
you're the vast minority of your people then.
But I literally just told you 92. What? Wait, when you say vast minority, have you ever seen a brown person in your life?
You just said 85. No, I've never seen a brown person in my life. You
I
just
said 85% of
them
people speak
speak
at
Spanish.
least some Spanish at home.
Okay, how many speak all Spanish at home?
I would have to click through on this, but if
Yeah,
92%
I've
speak
heard
English,
this. I've heard
well or
someone
very
say like
well.
22% of Hispanics in America speak Spanish as their primary language, and it's like again
Sure, as long
having
as you
a
can speak
foreign
English,
language.
Who cares?
Well, I mean, I guess if you want to live in a country where you have to listen to like thick accents from everywhere, all across the world, and you think that there will be no social cohesion cost to that at all whatsoever, then I guess there's no problem with that at all. But I think
Like,
that having people have you never been out in public and you're next to two Hispanic people and they're speaking English,
Dog,
and they
I
start speaking
literally
a
the
foreign
last place
language
I
right
went
in front of
to,
you?
the last place I went to was Aruba. They speak 4 languages there. Why do you think Americans are so retarded? They can't handle a couple people speaking Spanish. Right to the north of us in Canada, I'm pretty sure every single law has to be written in English and French. Like you can go to different places around the world where people are bilingual. everyone around the world. You go to literally any major city in the world, people speak English.
Because America is like a dominant world superpower.
Yeah, sure. But I'm just saying that they're like this idea that like there are some people that speak like Spanish in the United States and it's going to destroy our country. Number one, if you truly think that, how shit is your country that is going to fall apart because of that? Number two,
because
so many other countries around the world seem to be able to handle tons of languages with no problem. Number three, I don't know why your view of Americans is so low that you think that having a few people speaking Spanish here is going to be the destruction of our civilization. That sounds to me like some natural selection if that's what it takes to destroy the country.
So if that's natural, if that's where next natural selection leads us, then this is me here advocating for it to stop. If we agree that that's what's going to happen, if it's just like, well, I guess white people are going to die out because they just allowed this to happen to them. Well, here's me saying I don't want us to allow it to happen to us. As far as multi-language,
I got a little bit more hope in white people. I think they can do it.
Based. I think that as far as multilingual countries go, that usually comes along with countries that have multiple ethnicities living within them, multicultural ones, and that never really lasts long. We could look at Czechoslovakia, which was a great example. It was created by like the Treaty of Versailles or like the World War II treaty or something, and it was like what? I think it was Versailles. It was like what, 6 million Czechs.
I can't argue
4 million.
With,
3 million Slavs, 2 million Germans,
and
what ended up happening is the majority started oppressing the other minority groups.
I would like
split up.
I can't argue against like the hypotheticals of this might happen in the future. So I would be interested in seeing problems that exist right now and like what we can do to deal with some of those problems. But like this idea that like, in 20 years, little Timmy is going to be beat over the head with CRT sticks from his Arabic classmates. Like, I don't know what the fuck I can possibly say against that. Like I said,
right. I get it. I guess what you're saying is that you lack the vision to look ahead at future problems which don't exist yet, and swerve away in order to not hit the car in front of you. I mean, you can. I've just pointed to a historical example of Czechoslovakia.
Do you think Czechoslovakia is comparable? A country created by a treaty is comparable to the United States of America. Like, why would you even go to that as an example? It doesn't even like the fact that you have to use that as an example underlines how horrible your argument is.
The fact that it was created by a treaty has nothing to do with why it fell. It fell because it was a multi-ethnic country with different nations of people living within it who all had different cultures. They had their own national heritage, And but by national heritage, I don't mean they used to have their own countries. I mean, like in the international relations paradigm of what a nation is.
We've had different cultures in the U.S. since the literal inception of this country.
Yeah, but not this vastly different.
That
That's
are
the thing.
incredibly different.
And the minority groups assimilating into the majority culture has been an absolutely necessary part of that. And the fact that they're not now it presents a problem, because what happens when you have
think it presents a problem, but you can't point to any of the downsides yet. You think in the future.
I mean, again, the downsides are where this is going to head in the future. We look at what happened in Czechoslovakia, and it devolved, and it ended up splitting into two different countries. It was like ethnic conflict. Now we can go again. Like, I almost don't want to bring it up because it's like a meme at this point. I'm sure you've heard, like more than enough of it. But South Africa, that is like that's where this is all headed. This anti-white rhetoric in all of the media, in all of education, in the military, in the government, in Lockheed Martin. I'm sure Radical Coder knows all about it.
We can push against anti-white culture without having to say it needs to be like a majority white country. I don't know why you are so unimaginative that your only solutions, especially when the people pushing for a lot of this shit are other fucking white people.
The problem is that as non-white groups become a bigger part of the electorate, you're not going to appeal to them to defend white people from anti-white culture because it benefits them. And so it's in their best interest to support it. And so stopping bringing in the people
Hispanic
who would support
immigrants
that.
or children of Hispanic immigrants, I'm just curious, if you were driving through a neighborhood on a hot summer day and you see some of those Mexican immigrants working on rooftops or whatever you see them doing, if you were to get out of your car and be like, hey, what do you guys think of CRT? What do you think these answers are going to be from these people, right?
I mean, again, they're going to start teaching it in the schools, and they're going to start teaching these kids that, white people oppressed you, that they're not going to call it CRT or whatever. But if you start asking them, hey, are you pissed at do you think that the white man needs to answer for his, historical grievances? The fact that he, enslaved, colonized, and he fucked with your culture, and now you're, the white man's living in the ivory tower while you're working on this roof. You think that's fair? You think you deserve a leg up, and that, that you should get a better job at the expense of a white guy? Maybe he should be here on the roof instead. You think they're not going to say yes? Of course they will.
No,
it's in their best interest to do so.
I mean, maybe in your world where everybody lives online on Twitter 24/7 and they're obsessed with CRT and all this shit. But who knows? I guess we'll see.
No, I mean, it's in their best
problems
interest
start to crop up. I really like to see those problems.
I've worked in factories for a long time. I know these types of people
because of what happened in Czechoslovakia. But
I mean, again, Czechoslovakia, South Africa. Look at Rome. Look at any multi-ethnic.
It fell because of the multi-ethnicities, right? That's 100%.
Haven't you heard about Athens, Destiny?
Have you heard about all the multi? Maybe the gay people there too. Maybe, who knows? Yeah. But okay, I have another engagement.
Remember to hit that like and subscribe, and don't forget the notification bell so that my videos show up right in your feed.
Beauty is temporary. Stupid is forever.